The crystal chandelier above table 7 had witnessed 1,000 deals, 1,000 handshakes, 1,000 lies wrapped in linen napkins, and expensive wine. But it had never seen anything quite like this. The dining room of the Meridian, Boston's most exclusive restaurant, where reservations required 3 months' notice and a credit card that didn't flinch at 4-digit totals, hummed with the usual symphony of wealth. Silverware clinked against bone china. Leather shoes whispered across marble floors. Conversations floated like expensive perfume, carefully measured, never too loud, always controlled. Until now. This is unacceptable. The voice cut through the refined atmosphere like a chainsaw through silk. I have been waiting for 45 minutes, and not one person in this establishment can communicate with me properly. Elena Vasquez felt the words before she heard them. She was in the kitchen, balancing 3 plates of seared duck breast with cherry reduction along her left forearm, a skill she'd perfected over 2 years of 12-hour shifts, when the shout penetrated even the controlled chaos of Chef Maurice's domain. The French chef looked up from his station, his perpetually furrowed brow deepening into trenches of concern. "What is happening out there?" he muttered in his thick Parisian accent. "Sounds like someone is murdering the atmosphere." Elena set down the plates carefully, her heart already accelerating. She recognized that particular timbre of frustration, that edge of someone important who wasn't accustomed to obstacles. In her 26 years, she'd learned to read voices the way sailors read weather. It was a survival skill in the service industry. "I'll check," she said, smoothing down her black apron over her crisp white shirt. Her hands moved automatically to tuck a strand of dark hair back into her neat bun, a gesture she'd performed 10,000 times. The presentation was everything at the Meridian. You could be dying inside, drowning in student debt, working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, but your appearance had to be flawless. She pushed through the swinging doors into the dining room and immediately understood why the usual calm had shattered. Table 7, the power table, the one reserved for visiting dignitaries, tech moguls, old money meeting new money, had become a stage for a very public breakdown. A man stood beside it, tall and rigid as a monument, his gray suit clearly custom-tailored, his silver hair swept back from a face that looked carved from expensive marble. Beside him stood another man, younger, wearing the desperate expression of a translator who'd just realized his degree was worthless. "Mr. Hoffman, please, if you could just," the younger man was saying in English, his face flushed red. "When Sie nicht verstehen können, was ich sage, wie sollen wir dann just machen?" The older man, Hoffman, switched to rapid German, his words machine-gun fast, each syllable a bullet of impatience. His hands moved through the air, conducting an orchestra of frustration. "Ich have keine Zeit für diese Inkompetenz. Verstehen Sie? Keine Zeit." Elena watched from her position near the kitchen doors. Around table 7, the restaurant's general manager, Marcus Chun, was attempting damage control. His usually unflappable demeanor had cracked into visible panic. Beside him, Sarah, the senior server, the one who'd worked at the Meridian for 8 years and handled celebrities and senators with equal grace, looked lost, her tablet hanging uselessly in her hand. "Sir, I assure you we're doing everything we can," Marcus was saying, his voice maintaining professional calm despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "We have someone calling our translation service right now, and I don't need a phone." Hoffman's English returned, heavily accented but precise. "I need someone who understands. I need someone who can think, not just translate words like a machine. This deal, this partnership, it requires nuance, cultural understanding. And your staff stands here like statues." Elena's eyes drifted to the table itself. A leather portfolio lay open, documents spread across the white tablecloth like a patient's organs during surgery. She could see graphs, projections, what looked like architectural renderings. Beside the portfolio sat an older woman, perhaps in her 70s, with kind eyes and hands folded peacefully in her lap. She wore a simple gray dress with a pearl brooch, and unlike Hoffman, she seemed entirely untroubled by the chaos, merely observing with the patience of someone who'd seen many storms pass. The other diners had stopped pretending not to watch. Conversations had died. Forks hung suspended. The Meridian's carefully cultivated atmosphere of discreet luxury had evaporated, replaced by the kind of rubbernecking attention usually reserved for car accidents. Elena felt something shift in her chest. It was familiar, that pull toward problems, that inability to watch injustice or suffering without responding. Her mother used to call it her helping curse, the thing that made her stop for every stray dog, every crying child, every person who looked lost. It had gotten her into trouble before. It would probably get her into trouble again. But she was already moving. Elena, wait. She heard Chef Maurice call out behind her, but she was already crossing the dining room floor, her server's shoes silent on the marble. Marcus saw her approaching, and his eyes widened in warning. Not now, his expression said.
Not you.
You're just a waitress.
Stay in your lane.
But Elena had never been good at staying in her lane. Entschuldigung, she said quietly, and the single German word cut through the tension like a key finding its lock. Hoffman's head snapped toward her, his expression transforming from fury to surprise in the space of a heartbeat. Ich kann vielleicht helfen. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The dining room had become a photograph, everyone frozen in their positions of shock and curiosity. Elena stood there in her simple server's uniform, this woman who was supposed to be invisible, who was supposed to bring food and clear plates and never, ever insert herself into the affairs of important people. Hoffman's eyes narrowed. He studied her with the intensity of someone evaluating a rare artifact that had appeared unexpectedly at a garage sale. Then he spoke, slowly, testing her. Sie sprechen Deutsch? Ja. Elena replied, her accent flawless, the vowels shaped exactly as they should be, the rhythm natural as breathing. Ich have 5 Jahre in Berlin gelebt. Ich spreche fließend. The transformation in Hoffman's face was immediate. The hard edges softened. His shoulders dropped from their defensive height. Something like relief, or perhaps hope, flickered across his features. Berlin? Welcher Bezirk. Kreuzberg, Elena said, and a small smile touched her lips despite her nervousness. Near Gorlitzer Park. I worked at a small bookstore there and taught English at a community center. Now Hoffman did smile, a real smile that changed his entire face from intimidating to almost grandfatherly. Kreuzberg, the heart of Berlin. You know the real city, then not the tourist version. He switched to English, but his demeanor had completely changed. Please sit. Tell me, what is your name? Elena Vasquez. I'm a server here, but You are more than a server, Hoffman interrupted, gesturing to the empty chair beside the older woman. Anyone who has lived in Kreuzberg has stories to tell.
Please sit.
We need someone who understands context, not just words. Marcus looked like he might faint. Sarah's mouth had fallen open. The entire dining room was holding its breath. Elena glanced at Marcus, saw his minute nod. What choice did he have? And carefully lowered herself into the chair. Up close, she could see the documents more clearly. They were architectural plans for what looked like a massive community center. The text was in both German and English, but the notes in the margins were pure German, handwritten, full of abbreviations and cultural references that a simple translator would miss. The older woman beside her extended a hand. Greta Hoffman, she said in English softened by a German accent. His sister and the sensible half of our partnership. Her eyes twinkled with humor. You must forgive my brother. He gets passionate about his projects. It's not passion, it's principle, Hoffman said, but his tone had lost its edge. He sat down across from Elena, and suddenly the scene had transformed from confrontation to conversation. I am building something important here in Boston. Something that will help people. But if I cannot communicate my vision, if I cannot explain why it matters, he spread his hands. Then what is the point? Elena looked down at the documents. Her trained eye, honed by years of reading dense academic texts in multiple languages, began picking apart the information. This is a community center, she said slowly, translating as she read. But not just any center. You're creating a space specifically for immigrant families. Language classes, job training, cultural preservation programs. And more. Greta added quietly. Medical clinics. Legal aid. Childcare. Everything a family needs when they arrive in a new country and feel lost. Elena felt something catch in her throat. She knew that feeling. She'd lived it. When her family had moved from Mexico to Boston when she was 12, they had nothing, no connections, no resources, no one who spoke their language in the places that mattered. Her mother had cleaned houses for pennies. Her father had worked construction jobs that paid under the table and offered no protection. Elena had learned English by watching television and reading library books, staying up until midnight to finish homework she didn't fully understand. She'd survived.
But barely.
And many others hadn't. The city council is reviewing our proposal, Hoffman continued, leaning forward. But they don't understand the scope of what we're trying to do. They see buildings and budgets, but they don't see people. They don't see the seamstress from Vietnam who needs a place where her children can learn English while she works. They don't see the engineer from Syria who needs help getting his credentials recognized. They don't see the waitress who speaks 5 languages but serves duck breast because her degree isn't American enough, Elena said quietly. The words escaped before she could stop them. It was unprofessional. It was personal. It was dangerous to show vulnerability to people like this, people who had power, who made decisions about other people's lives from the comfort of expensive restaurants. But Hoffman didn't look offended. He looked vindicated. Exactly, he said. Exactly this. You understand. Marcus appeared at Elena's shoulder, nervous energy radiating from him like heat. Mr. Hoffman, I apologize for the confusion earlier. Elena is one of our best staff members, and if she can assist you with translation, we're happy to. She can do more than translate, Hoffman said, waving away the apology. She can help us understand how to present this to people who don't see what we see. He turned back to Elena. How long have you worked here? 2 years, Elena said. But I've worked in restaurants since I was 16. It's how I paid for university. And later, how I saved money to study in Germany. And what did you study? Urban planning and social work, Elena said. The words felt strange in her mouth. She rarely talked about her education. What was the point? Her degree had gotten her nowhere except deeper into debt. I wanted to help communities develop sustainably, to create spaces where people could thrive, not just survive. Greta's hand touched Elena's arm gently. And instead you bring people duck breast. It wasn't said cruelly. It was said with understanding, with sadness, with the recognition of a world that wasted talent because of paperwork and prejudice and 1,000 invisible barriers. Elena looked at the older woman and saw something in her eyes that made her chest tight. Recognition. Solidarity. The kind of knowing that came from having overlooked yourself. Someone has to bring the duck, Elena said, trying to smile. And, honestly, Chef Maurice makes it really well. Hoffman laughed, a bark of genuine amusement. True. The food here is excellent. That's why we chose this restaurant. Well, that, and the supposed professional service. He shot Marcus a look that wasn't quite forgiving, but wasn't entirely harsh either. Though perhaps we found something better than what we expected. Marcus, sensing an opportunity to salvage the situation, straightened. Mr. Hoffman, if there's anything else we can provide to make your meeting successful. Time, Hoffman said. And someone who can read these documents with us and help us refine our presentation to the city council. Someone who understands both the language and the lived experience of what we're trying to create. He looked at Elena. How long is your shift? Elena blinked. I work until closing, 11 p.m. And when is your next day off? Sunday. But I have another job on Sunday mornings, Ada. Cancel it, Hoffman said. Elena's spine straightened. I can't cancel it. I need the money. I have student loans, rent, my mother's medical bills. I'll pay you double whatever you make on Sunday, Hoffman said.
Triple.
Whatever is fair. I need your help with this project, Elena Vasquez. Not as a translator. As a consultant. As someone who knows what it's like to be invisible in a place that should see you. The dining room had gone silent again, but this time it was different. This time people were leaning in, interested, perhaps even moved. This wasn't a conflict anymore. This was something else. Something unexpected. Elena looked down at the documents again. She saw community gardens, child care centers, libraries, legal aid offices, computer labs, all the things she'd dreamed of creating herself, back when she thought her degree would matter, back when she believed that hard work and education would be enough. Her practical side screamed at her to be careful. People like Hoffman didn't really want input from people like her. They wanted validation.
They wanted to feel good about themselves.
And when the project was done, she'd be back to carrying plates while they collected awards and recognition. But another part of her, the part that had never quite died despite years of rejection and disappointment, whispered something different. Maybe this time is different. Maybe this is the chance you've been waiting for. I'll do it, she heard herself say. But I need to finish my shift tonight first. And I want a contract. Something in writing that specifies my hours and my compensation. Hoffman's smile grew wider. Smart. I respect this. Greta, call our lawyer. Draw up a consulting agreement. Greta was already pulling out her phone. Consider it done. Marcus looked between Elena and Hoffman like he was watching a tennis match played in a language he didn't speak. This is highly irregular. Elena, you understand you're still expected to fulfill your duties here at the Meridian? Of course, Elena said, standing up. Her legs felt shaky, but her voice was steady. And actually, I believe Table 12's appetizers should be ready. If you'll excuse me. She walked back toward the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, she could hear Hoffman speaking to Greta in rapid German, excitement clear in his tone. Around them, the dining room slowly returned to life, conversations resuming, but now with Elena as the subject. She could feel the eyes on her back, curious, skeptical, judging. In the kitchen, Chef Maurice grabbed her arm. What did you just do? I have no idea, Elena admitted. But I think I just got a second job. Or fired from your first one, Sarah said, appearing behind them with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen, or the stupidest. Maybe both, Elena said. She picked up the plates for Table 12, the appetizers perfectly arranged, each garnish precisely placed, and carried them back out into the dining room. As she passed Table 7, Hoffman raised his wine glass to her slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. Greta smiled. Elena smiled back and kept walking. If you're enjoying Elena's story of courage and transformation, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more inspiring stories like this one. She didn't know it yet, but in that moment, in that single decision to speak up, to offer help, to be visible instead of invisible, she had changed the trajectory of her entire life. The chandelier above Table 7 sparkled with reflected light, bearing witness to the beginning of something that would ripple outward in ways no one could predict. But for now, there was work to do. There were tables to serve, orders to deliver, customers to smile at and accommodate. Elena Vasquez was still a waitress at the Meridian, still invisible to most of the people who walked through those doors. The difference was that now, to two people who mattered, she had been seen. And sometimes, being seen by the right people at the right moment is all it takes for everything to change. Elena's alarm went off at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before she actually needed to wake up. She'd learned years ago that those 13 minutes mattered. They were the buffer between rushing and drowning, between having time to breathe and starting the day already defeated. She reached out from under her blanket, the morning air cold against her skin, and silenced her phone. In the bed across from hers, separated by barely 3 feet of space, her roommate Priya continued snoring softly. The studio apartment they shared in Dorchester was technically a one-bedroom, but they'd converted the living room into Elena's sleeping area with a curtain hung from ceiling hooks. $1,200 a month split 2 ways was manageable. Barely. Elena sat up slowly, her body cataloging the usual aches. Her feet throbbed, the consequence of 10 hours standing and walking yesterday. Her lower back protested, remembering the heavy tray of dishes she'd carried. Her shoulders held the tension of performing cheerfulness for 8 hours straight, smiling through microaggressions and impatience and the casual cruelty of people who saw service workers as part of the furniture. But today, underneath the physical exhaustion, there was something else. Anticipation.
Fear.
Hope. This strange cocktail of emotions she'd felt ever since Tuesday night, when she'd spoken German to a billionaire and apparently changed her life. 3 days had passed since the incident at the Meridian. At that time, Elena had received a formal consulting contract via email, reviewed by a lawyer she couldn't afford to hire herself, so she'd asked her friend Miguel, who'd gone to law school before dropping out, to look it over. "It's legitimate," he'd said, suspicious but impressed. "They're offering you $150 an hour for consultation work. That's more than I make as a paralegal." Today was Sunday, her first official day as a consultant for the Hoffman Foundation. She was terrified. Elena moved quietly through her morning routine. Shower in the building's shared bathroom down the hall, careful to not slip on the perpetually wet tiles. Back to the apartment to dress in the nicest clothes she owned, black slacks from Target, a white blouse she'd found at a thrift store, the blazer she'd bought for job interviews that had led nowhere. She looked at herself in the small mirror hung on the back of the door and saw someone trying very hard to look like she belonged in rooms where decisions were made. "You look fancy," Priya murmured, awake now, watching Elena from the bed. "Big day." "First day of the consulting thing," Elena said, trying to keep her voice casual. "I'm meeting Hoffman and his sister at their office downtown. They want to go over the community center proposals." Priya sat up, her mass of black curls wild from sleep. She was a nurse at Boston Medical Center, working night shifts that left her perpetually exhausted, but somehow still radiating warmth. "You're going to kill it. You know that, right?" "I don't know anything," Elena said honestly. "I might show up and realize they just wanted a token opinion. Or I'll say something stupid and they'll realize I'm not actually qualified for this." "You have a degree in urban planning from a Mexican university that most Americans think is equivalent to a high school diploma," Elena said. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. She tried to soften it.
"Sorry.
"I'm just nervous." Priya got out of bed, crossed the small space, and hugged Elena hard. She smelled like hospital antiseptic and the lavender lotion she always wore to mask it. "Listen to me. You are brilliant. You speak 5 languages. You worked your way through school while supporting your family. You survived in Berlin on nothing. You are more qualified than half the people who will walk into that office with fancy American degrees and no actual life experience." Elena hugged her back, grateful. "What would I do without you?" "Probably sleep on the street, since you definitely can't afford this place alone," Priya said, pulling back with a grin. "Now go. And text me when you're done. I want to hear everything." The tea was crowded even on Sunday morning. Elena stood pressed against other bodies, holding the pole, watching Boston slide past through scratched windows. The city looked different in morning light, softer, more hopeful. She'd loved this city once, when she first arrived at 14 with stars in her eyes and belief in the American dream. That belief had been ground down slowly, like rocks in a river, until what remained was just the smooth, hard stone of survival. But maybe, she thought as the train rattled through a tunnel, maybe there was still something left to believe in. The Hoffman Foundation offices were in the financial district, in a building that looked like it cost more than Elena would earn in her entire lifetime. The lobby was all glass and steel and abstract art that probably had deep meanings she didn't understand. A security guard, an older black man with kind eyes, checked her ID and made a call. 23rd floor, he said, handing back her driver's license. "Good luck up there." "Thank you," Elena said, and wondered if her nervousness was that obvious. The elevator was empty, giving her 60 seconds to watch her reflection in the polished steel doors. She looked small, young, out of place. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. "Fake it until you make it," her mother always said. "Pretend you belong until one day you realize you actually do." The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that looked like something from a design magazine. White walls, dark wood accents, plants that looked too healthy to be real but probably were. A young woman at the desk, impeccably dressed, perfectly professional, smiled at Elena with what seemed like genuine warmth. "You must be Elena Vasquez," Mr. Hoffman is expecting you. Conference room C, down the hall to your right. Elena walked down the hallway, her shoes silent on the thick carpet. Through glass walls, she could see various offices and meeting rooms, most empty on Sunday. The Hoffman Foundation was apparently active 7 days a week, driven by the same passion that had led Hoffman to shout in a restaurant when no one could understand him. She found conference room C and paused at the door. Through the glass, she could see Hoffman and Greta already there, along with 3 other people she didn't recognize. They were all looking at a large screen on the wall, which displayed what looked like demographic data and maps of Boston neighborhoods. This was it. The moment where she either proved she belonged here or revealed herself as an imposter who'd just gotten lucky with her German. Elena knocked on the glass door. All 5 people turned toward her. Hoffman's face broke into a smile. He stood and opened the door himself, gesturing her in with obvious pleasure. "Elena! Come in, come in. We were just discussing the Roxbury site." He spoke in English, but his accent made the words dance. "Let me introduce you to the team. This is David Chun, our lead architect, Martha Williams, Director of Community Outreach, and Thomas Klein, who handles our foundation's operations." Elena shook each hand in turn, reading their faces carefully. David seemed curious and open. Martha's expression was professional but guarded. She was probably wondering why a waitress was suddenly a consultant. Thomas looked openly skeptical, his handshake perfunctory. "Please sit," Greta said from her position at the table. She dressed casually today, simple jeans and a sweater, but somehow still looked elegant. "We've been waiting for you. My brother has been talking about your perspective all week." Elena sat, placing her notebook. She'd brought an actual physical notebook, feeling like a tablet would be presumptuous, on the table in front of her. "I'm honored to be here. Though I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure what you need from me." "Honesty," Hoffman said immediately. He pressed a button and the screen changed, showing architectural renderings of a large, modern building. "We have the money. We have plans. We have political connections. But Martha here, she's been telling us that our proposals keep missing something. That the communities we want to serve are polite, but not enthusiastic. We look good on paper, but something is wrong." Martha leaned forward, her dark eyes serious. "I've been doing community work for 20 years, she said, her voice carrying the measured confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. "And I've learned that the best projects fail if they don't have community buy-in. Right now, when I talk to immigrant families, refugee organizations, community leaders, they're grateful but hesitant. They say thank you, but they don't say yes, this is what we need." "And you think I can tell you why?" Elena asked. "I think you've lived the experience we're trying to serve," Martha said. "And I think you might see what those of us with fancy degrees and good intentions are missing." Elena looked at the renderings on the screen. The building was beautiful, all glass and light, open spaces, modern design. It looked like something from a European city, progressive and forward-thinking. And suddenly, she saw the problem. "It's too nice," she said quietly. 5 faces turned toward her with varying expressions of confusion. "What do you mean, too nice?" Thomas asked, his skepticism now more pronounced. "We're trying to create a space where people feel valued, respected." "No, I understand that," Elena interrupted, then paused, gathering her thoughts. This was the moment. She could play it safe, agree with everything, and collect her consulting fee. Or she could tell the truth and risk offending the very people who'd given her this chance. She chose the truth. "When my family first came to Boston," Elena said slowly, "we were terrified of anything that looked too official, too expensive, too clean. Beautiful buildings like this," she gestured to the screen, "they feel like places where people will judge you, where you'll be asked for papers you don't have, or turned away because you don't speak English well enough, or made to feel ashamed for not knowing how things work." The room had gone very quiet. Immigrant families, especially undocumented ones, they've learned to be invisible, Elena continued. They go to places that feel safe, that feel like theirs. Community churches with signs in their language. Small restaurants where the owners know their names. Stores where they don't feel watched. This building, she pointed to the screen. It's gorgeous. But it looks like a place where security guards ask questions. where forms are required, where mistakes are punished. Martha was nodding slowly. David had pulled out his own notebook and was writing furiously. Thomas still looked skeptical, but he was listening. Hoffman's expression was intense, focused entirely on Elena. "Go on," Greta said softly. "Don't stop now." Elena took a breath. "The design is beautiful, but it's designed for people who already have confidence, who already feel like they belong in spaces like this. You need something different. Something that feels like a home, not an institution. Maybe not all glass and modern lines. Maybe something that feels lived in, welcoming. Warm colors. Multiple entrances, so people don't feel funneled and controlled. Signs in 10 languages, not just English and Spanish. And the staff. It can't all be white people with good intentions. It has to be immigrants serving immigrants. People who understand what it's like to be afraid." She'd gone too far. She could see it in Thomas's face, in the way his jaw had tightened. She'd just criticized their beautiful design, their careful planning, their months of work. But Hoffman was smiling. "David," he said, not taking his eyes off Elena. "Everything she just said, can you incorporate it?" David looked up from his notes, surprised but excited. Yes. Yes, absolutely. It would mean rethinking some major elements, but the core structure could remain. We'd need to warm up the materials, maybe add more wood, and definitely reconsider the entrance design." "Do it," Hoffman said. "Martha, what about the staffing piece?" "She's absolutely right," Martha said, and there was respect in her voice now. "I've been saying we need to hire from within the communities we serve, but I didn't quite articulate why." Elena just did. Thomas cleared his throat. "This would add costs. Redesign, training programs for community staff members who might not have traditional qualifications." "So we spend more money," Hoffman said, shrugging. "Money we have. What we don't have is the knowledge Elena just shared. That is priceless." Elena felt something warm expand in her chest. It was dangerous, that feeling. It felt like hope, like validation, like maybe she actually knew something worth knowing. "I have more thoughts," she said hesitantly. "If you want to hear them." "We have all day," Greta said, smiling.
Please.
"Continue." And so Elena did. For the next 3 hours, she walked them through everything she'd learned in her own journey through Boston's immigrant communities. She talked about the importance of food, how a kitchen space where people could prepare their own cultural dishes would matter more than any fancy cafeteria. She explained the role of informal networks, how information spread through beauty salons and barbershops and church basements. She described the fear of asking for help, the pride that kept people from accepting charity, the need to contribute and not just receive. She pulled from her years in Berlin, too, from her time in Kreuzberg, where she'd watched a community center transform lives not because of its programs, but because of its heart. She talked about the bookstore where she'd worked, how it had become a gathering place because the owner had understood that people needed spaces to simply be, without pressure or expectations. David filled pages with notes. Martha added her own insights, building on Elena's observations with her professional experience. Thomas slowly, grudgingly, began contributing practical thoughts about implementation. Greta asked quiet, penetrating questions that forced Elena to think deeper. And Hoffman watched it all with the satisfaction of someone who'd made a very good investment. At noon, Greta called for lunch to be brought in. Elena protested. She wasn't sure if consulting fees covered meals, but was overruled. They ate sandwiches from a local deli and continued talking, the conversation flowing from architecture to programming to funding to politics. "The city council meeting is in 2 weeks, Martha said, checking her calendar. "That's when we present the updated proposal and ask for final approval on the permits and zoning variances. Elena, I'd like you there." Elena nearly choked on her sandwich. "At the city council meeting? I don't think. You should speak," Hoffman said. "You explain better than any of us why this matters. You have lived it. They need to hear your voice." "I'm a waitress," Elena said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "They'll see me and think I'm nobody. It'll hurt your case, not help it." The room went silent. Elena realized what she'd just revealed, not just her fear, but her shame. The internalized belief that she was less than, that her voice didn't matter, that people like her should stay quiet and let important people make important decisions. Greta reached across the table and placed her hand over Elena's. Do you know why my brother built this foundation? Elena shook her head. Because 50 years ago, we came to America from Germany with nothing, Greta said quietly. Our parents had died. We were teenagers alone, terrified. And a woman who worked as a cleaning lady in New York, a woman everyone ignored, she helped us. She found us a place to live, helped us apply for school, taught us how to navigate systems we didn't understand. She was nobody, according to people who measure worth by money and status. Greta's eyes held Elena's. But she saved our lives. And when my brother made his fortune in technology, we never forgot her. Every dollar we spend now, every project we build, it's because a waitress once saw two scared children and decided they mattered. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back. What happened to her? She died 10 years ago, Hoffman said, his voice rough with emotion. Her name was Rosa Martinez. She was from Mexico, like you. And she never got to see what her kindness created, how it rippled outward. But we never forgot. We will never forget. So when I tell you that your voice matters, Greta continued, I mean it with everything I have. You are not nobody, Elena Vasquez. You are exactly who we need to speak at that meeting. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They worked until 4 p.m., until Elena's brain felt full to bursting with information and ideas and possibilities. As the meeting wound down, Hoffman walked her to the elevator. Thank you for today, he said. You've given us more than you know. I should be thanking you, Elena said. This opportunity is one you earned, Hoffman interrupted. By having the courage to speak when you could have stayed silent. By offering your knowledge when you could have protected yourself from judgment. That is worth more than any degree or credential. The elevator dinged. Elena stepped inside, then turned back. Mr. Hoffman, can I ask you something? Of course. That night at the restaurant, when you were so frustrated, so angry, what were you actually upset about? Hoffman smiled sadly. I had just come from a meeting with developers who wanted to turn the Roxbury site into luxury condos. They had graphs and projections showing how much profit they'd make. And they couldn't understand why I wanted to waste the space on a community center for people who couldn't pay market rate. They looked at me like I was insane. He paused. And then I went to your restaurant, expecting excellence, and instead found people who couldn't understand me. It felt like the whole world had forgotten how to listen, how to care about things that matter. And then I spoke German, Elena said. And then you spoke German, Hoffman agreed. And reminded me that the world is full of invisible people who see things others miss. You gave me hope that night. Elena's bravery in speaking her truth is just the beginning. Don't miss what happens next. Hit that like button if you're rooting for her, and share this story with someone who needs inspiration today. The night before the city council meeting, Elena couldn't sleep. The night before the city council meeting, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay on her mattress behind the curtain in her studio apartment, listening to Priya's gentle snoring and the endless city sounds outside. In her mind, Diane Hartford's words circled like vultures. Window dressing, being used, won't actually help anyone. At 3 a.m., Elena gave up on sleep. She opened her laptop and reread every document the foundation had shared. Budget projections, architectural plans, community surveys, Morrison's conditions. Then she did something she'd been avoiding. She called every phone number listed in the community feedback surveys. It took 6 hours. She reached about 30 people, waking some, catching others before work. She identified herself honestly. I'm Elena Vasquez, consulting for the Hoffman Foundation. The city council votes today. I need to know, do you actually want the center, or are we building something nobody asked for? The responses were mixed but telling. Some people were enthusiastic, others skeptical but hopeful. A few were hostile, accusing the foundation of gentrification. But one conversation changed everything. Mrs. Okafor, a Nigerian woman who'd been in Boston for 12 years, said, I went to one of their meetings. I told them we needed childcare. if they expected people to use the center's programs. Your people, they listened. They added a whole childcare section to the plans. When does that ever happen? When do people like us get listened to? What about the criticism that we're just doing this for publicity? Elena asked. Mrs. Okafor laughed, but it wasn't unkind. Baby, everything wealthy people do is partly for publicity. The question isn't why they're doing it. The question is whether it helps us anyway. And I think maybe this one will. By the time Elena arrived at City Hall that afternoon, she'd made peace with her doubts. She would never know Hoffman's complete motivations. She would never be certain the project wouldn't fail or become compromised. But Mrs. Okafor was right. The question wasn't about purity of intention. It was about actual outcomes. And Elena could help ensure those outcomes served real people. The city council chamber was packed. Elena sat in the front row between Martha and Greta, wearing a blazer her mother had insisted on buying her the day before. Hoffman sat several rows back, deliberately keeping his distance so the focus would be on community voices, not wealthy benefactors. Elena watched as various speakers approached the podium. Community leaders spoke in support. The Boston Community Development Alliance presented their objections, with Diane Hartford arguing the project was well-intentioned but inadequately planned. Several community members spoke against the project, fearing displacement and gentrification. Then it was Elena's turn. She walked to the podium on legs that felt made of water. The council members looked down at her from their elevated positions, 14 people with the power to change lives with a vote. She saw Councillor Morrison, who gave her a tiny nod of encouragement. Elena placed her written speech on the podium, looked at it, and then gently pushed it aside. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "I came to this country when I was 12. My parents brought me here illegally because staying in Mexico meant staying poor, probably forever. I understand why some of you might be skeptical about this project. I was skeptical too." She told her story, not the sanitized version, but the real one. She talked about being invisible, about having a master's degree that meant nothing, about speaking 5 languages in a city that only valued English. She talked about her mother's damaged hands and her father's untreated injury. She talked about being afraid, always afraid, of deportation, of poverty, of never being enough. When Hoffman asked me to consult on this project, I thought I was being hired to make them look good, Elena said. And maybe that was part of it. I'm not naive. But here's what actually happened. They listened. When I said their building looked intimidating, they redesigned it. When I said their hiring practices were tokenism, they created real programs with real power for community members. When Councillor Morrison added conditions, they agreed immediately. She paused, looking directly at Diane Hartford in the audience. Some people have suggested I'm being used as window dressing. Maybe that's true. But you know what? I've spent my whole life being invisible. If I'm going to be seen, I'd rather be seen doing something that might actually help people like my family than staying invisible forever. Elena shifted her attention back to the council. I can't promise this project will be perfect. Nothing ever is. But I can promise that I'll keep showing up. I'll keep telling them when they get it wrong. I'll keep pushing them to serve the people who actually need help, not the people they want to be seen helping. And if it fails, if it becomes just another empty promise, then I'll be the first person standing here telling you we failed. She picked up her written speech and held it up. I wrote something much more polished than this. It had statistics and citations and all the things I thought you wanted to hear. But Mrs. Okafor, who I called this morning at 5 a.m., sorry again, Mrs. Okafor, reminded me that the question isn't about intentions. It's about outcomes. So here's my ask. Approve this project, with Councillor Morrison's conditions, and then hold us accountable. Not politely, not gently, but really accountable. Because that's what we need. That's what the community deserves. Elena returned to her seat, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Martha squeezed her hand. Greta whispered, "Perfect." The council deliberated for 30 minutes, then took a vote. It passed 10-4, with Morrison's conditions incorporated into the approval. 6 months later, Elena stood in the shell of the community center, watching construction workers frame out what would become the childcare area. She was now the community liaison director, working 30 hours a week for the foundation and still picking up occasional shifts at the Meridian, partly for the income, partly because she'd missed her coworkers, and partly because it kept her grounded. The center was still months from completion, but Elena had already launched preliminary programs from temporary spaces. A jobs fellowship had placed 15 immigrants in professional training programs. A legal aid clinic was helping families navigate immigration paperwork. Language classes ran every evening. It wasn't perfect. There had been stumbles, a program that didn't attract participants, a hiring decision that had to be reversed, conflicts between community board members about priorities. Elena documented everything, reported honestly to Morrison and the city council, and kept pushing. Priya appeared in the construction site doorway, carrying 2 coffee cups. "Break time, boss." "I'm not the boss," Elena protested, but she took the coffee gratefully. "You kind of are, though," Priya said. "How does that feel?" Elena considered the question. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was visible, sometimes uncomfortably so. She'd been profiled in the Boston Globe, criticized by conservative outlets for being pro-immigrant, praised by progressive ones for her advocacy. Her mother kept the newspaper articles in a scrapbook. Carlos had told everyone at his mechanic shop about his sister, who told billionaires what to do. Terrifying, Elena admitted. But also right. Like, maybe this is what I was supposed to be doing all along. Speaking of which, Priya said, "I talked to Morrison's office about that healthcare access program you proposed. They want to schedule a meeting." Elena smiled. The healthcare program was her latest project, using the community center model to improve healthcare access for immigrant families. It was ambitious, probably too ambitious, but Elena was learning that being visible meant you could attempt things that invisible people never got the chance to try. Her phone buzzed. A text from Hoffman. "Dinner tonight? I have a new project idea. You'll hate it initially, which means it needs your input." Elena laughed and texted back, "I'll hate it efficiently. See you at 7. She looked around the construction site, raw concrete and exposed beams that would soon become rooms where people learned English, where children played while their parents took classes, where families like hers found help without fear. It was real. It was happening.
And she was part of making it happen.
Mrs. Okafor appeared then, as if summoned by Elena's thoughts, navigating the construction site with her usual determined stride. She was now on the community advisory board, volunteering 20 hours a week despite working full-time as a home health aide. "Elena," she called, "we need to talk about the computer lab setup. Some of the equipment you ordered is too advanced. We need simpler interfaces for people just learning." "You're absolutely right," Elena said. "Can you send me recommendations?" Mrs. Okafor nodded approvingly. "That's why this project works. You ask instead of assuming. So many projects assume." After she left, Priya raised her coffee cup in a toast. "To be visible." "To be visible," Elena echoed. But she thought, not just visible. Necessary. After 29 years of being overlooked, Elena Vasquez had become someone the city needed, someone whose voice mattered, someone who could stand in rooms where decisions were made and change what those decisions looked like. The construction site hummed with activity around her, hammers and saws and voices shouting in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and languages Elena was still learning. The sound of building something new, something real, something that might actually help. She finished her coffee, thanked Priya, and went back to work. There were budgets to review, community members to call, problems to solve, and a city council meeting next week where she'd have to defend a budget overrun. Elena Vasquez had been invisible for most of her life. Now she was visible, imperfect, and doing work that mattered. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd earned. One honest conversation, one difficult decision, one act of courage at a time. And in the invisible city, full of invisible people, Elena had learned the most important truth. Sometimes you have to speak up in your own voice, in whatever language comes most naturally, and trust that the right people will finally hear you. Thank you for following Elena's incredible journey from invisible waitress to community leader. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment telling us about a time you found your voice. We read every single one, and your story might inspire our next video.